Everybody. Welcome to the next session of the day. My name is Angelica Hofstad and I'm with One Young World. It is a session. I'd like to welcome everybody here attending in Glasgow as well as all of our digital attendees back home. Behind me you'll find the Slido code, so please feel free to drop in any questions you may have during this session so we can address them at the end. Without further ado, it really is my pleasure to introduce the next session on This House Believes There's a Role for both plant and animal agriculture in a low-carbon world. So please join me in welcoming Barry Johnston, Louise Byrne, Scott Shearlaw, Isabel Tarsh, and we will also be joining Joe Truen online. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes, great. So as you have already been welcomed, I'll kick straight off. Introduce myself first. I'm Barry Johnston. I'm one of the co-founders of Purpose Union. We're an organization that supports social purpose in organizations that want to leave the world in a slightly better place than I think most people in Glasgow this week would protest to be doing. I also had a little bit of a background in writing on food and sustainability issues. Wrote a column called The Politics of the Plate in Food and Wine magazine in Ireland. So I've been looking at some of these issues for quite a while. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We're having a debate. And we're doing that for deliberate reasons, for two reasons probably. One, you've probably all seen a lot of panels for the last week. We're halfway through COP. There's only so many times you can hear people agreeing with one another. So today we're going to try and have a respectful but spicy conversation on the topic before us. On a more serious note, I think COP is one example, climate politics is one example, but increasingly we're seeing people separate into opposing camps and talk past one another, not to one another, and have conversations that really should include a lot more people in the one room, despite their disagreements, and instead they're talking in separate rooms. We're hoping that some of you today might actually have your mind changed. We'll test that. We're going to ask you to vote before and after, and we're going to see, based on that, who actually wins the debate today. We'll talk you through the format of how it goes. A couple of practicalities. First of all, some of you will be joining us remotely. Please do get involved. Please do ask questions. There'll be an opportunity for that. You may see a couple of us swaying a little bit, so for those of you remote, we are on a boat. So if any of our participants are a little green around the gills, it's for that reason, not because they were in the bars of the West End until whatever hour last night. Today we're going to be discussing a topic which does arouse great passions. In the future of food, questions of what belongs on the plate, who should have it, what we should be eating, can often take up a lot of consideration. Increasingly in the climate conversation, we're seeing it a bigger topic, and we've got a number of great experts to debate it today. Our motion is, this House believes that plant and animal agriculture has a role to play in a net zero future. We're going to do this Oxford style. I'll talk you through how that will go, but I want to introduce our panel, some of whom are here, some of whom are joining us virtually. Proposing the motion, speaking in favour of the House, will be Scott Shearlaw from First Milk, on my right, and Isabel Tara from Nescafe. Opposing the motion will be Joe Truen, joining us down the line, an independent expert and PhD candidate in sustainable food, and Louise Byrne from Nestle. So, the motion. This House believes that plant and animal agriculture has a role to play in our net zero future. By a show of hands in the room, and please do indicate your support for those watching from Slido, can I get a show of hands for those who propose or are in favour of that motion? Okay, I count that as probably 2/3 of the room, with a heavy geographic location of those votes. So, for those who are opposing the motion, you've got some minds to change in the room. We'll do the voting again at the end to see how we go. In short order, we're going to hear 4 speeches, 5 minutes each. I will be pretty strict on time. I'll give you a tap on my microphone when you have 1 minute gone, and I'll give you a tap on my microphone when you have 1 minute left. We'll have a little bit of crosstalk. Would encourage you all to disagree one another vehemently, if possible, but of course, respectfully. And then we'll also keep some time to bring in people from the floor. I want to make sure people have the opportunity to challenge, to provoke, to agree, to disagree, again, respectfully. And then we'll return to some closing statements, 2 minutes each, and we'll have a final vote. And then, for those who are being asked to play a role in the debate today, we'll break character at the very end in case you would like to disavow everything you've said for the previous 45 minutes. Okay, I think I have now covered everything I needed to in my introduction, so we will enter the debate proper. And to propose the motion, this House believes that plant and animal agriculture have a role to play in our net zero future. I'd like to ask first, for 5 minutes, Scott Shirlow to take the podium.
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Shirlaw, and I'm a dairy farmer from Ayrshire in Scotland. So you could call me an indigenous farmer. I run my family's farm of 600 acres and 400 milking cows. We produce 3 million litres of milk every year, and that milk is sold to Nestle through our cooperative First Milk. Nestle use our milk to make chocolate crumb at their factory, which is 13 miles away from the farm. The chocolate crumb is used in some of Nestle's biggest brands like Kit Kat and Yorkie. In Scotland, 85% of our land is only suitable for growing grass. And in southwest Scotland, we can grow as much grass as anywhere else in the Northern Hemisphere. Livestock farming in this part of the world is all about turning grass, a plant which isn't digestible by humans, into milk or into beef. In Scotland, we also have the benefit of distillery byproducts from the whisky industry, which provide us with a net zero source of protein to complement the grass silage which we feed our cows during the winter. Using cows to harvest grass and to turn that into milk is the most efficient way of managing most of our farmland in the UK. 60% of beef produced in the UK comes from dairy farms, and that beef comes with a carbon footprint which is 60% lower than that from dedicated beef herds. The Committee for Climate Change recognises that together, that equates to a carbon footprint which is 50% of the global average for beef. In the UK, we have some of the most efficient cows in the world. There are currently 278 million dairy cows worldwide. If all of these cows were as efficient as the cows in the UK, we would only need 76 million of them. Because of the efficiency of UK cows, the greenhouse gas footprint is 40% of the global average. Most of the stats around carbon footprint are quoted in the press, regarding dairy and beef production are global figures, which is incredibly frustrating for a farmer in the UK who is producing dairy and beef for less than half of the global average greenhouse gas. The main greenhouse gas that cows are responsible for is methane. Methane is 28 times more warming to the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. The method that the world uses to measure the warming impact of gases is GWP 100, which assumes that methane lasts for 100 years in the atmosphere, when in reality it only lasts for 10. So the lack of accuracy in the measurement of the impact of methane falsely increases the carbon footprint of cows on paper. In addition to that, carbon footprinting doesn't currently account for carbon sequestered by the soil from the land in which the cows are grazed. Farmers have the unique ability of being able to inset their carbon footprint rather than offsetting, which the majority of other industries have to do. Typically, grassland can sequester up to 20 tonnes per hectare more than mixed woodland can. With grassland having the benefit of being able to feed livestock and provide us with food security and significantly more economic benefit.
One minute left. 1 minute.
When we, okay. With all that being said, livestock farmers are under no illusion that we are part of the problem when it comes to climate change. And we haven't moved fast enough in the past to reduce our emissions, but I can assure you that reducing emissions is the industry's #1 priority. And it's not just talk, we are already taking action to do that. Until recently, we were unable to accurately measure the amount of carbon stored in the soil. But this year, every acre of my farm has been carbon soil tested. And we believe that by changing the way we manage the soil, we can sequester up to 50% more. 10 years ago, I started changing the way I graze my cows through a scheme that was funded by Nestle. We now rotationally graze our cows, and in the carbon soil testing that we've seen, those fields are already sequestering more carbon. There's also a number of feed additives.
I have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
Okay, so there's also a number of feed additives on the market that are being developed that can reduce the amount of methane that cows produce significantly. We can treat cattle slurry with lightning plasma, which separates the nitrogen and completely eradicates the methane. Methane in cattle slurry is 10% of the methane produced.
There we go. That's the wrap-up.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Scott. And a special thanks for introducing the concept of efficient cows. I love that. Lots of cows with spreadsheets, using Trello, getting their work done. We're going to go down the line to Joe now. My microphone doesn't seem to cut people off as efficiently, so I will tap on the table with 1 minute gone and 1 minute to go. But equally, if there's anyone on the line with Joe that they can ping her a message on Zoom, that would be great too. So Joe, over to you.
Thank you. I'll listen up for the table taps. I can hear you well, so hoping that will come through. My name is Joe Truen. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this debate today. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am a PhD researcher at the University of Surrey, and my research looks at how food companies can help consumers transition to healthier, more sustainable diets. So, as all of you here today will know very well, we're currently in the midst of a climate and nature crisis. It's never been more urgent to address the impact we're having on our planet, and the need for ambitious action at this point in time is critical. Our food system is the leading cause of nature loss, of deforestation, and of land conversion. And unfortunately, animal agriculture is responsible for a big part of this, as it takes up 80% of our farmland, uses around a quarter of all our fresh water, and drives water pollution and soil degradation. It's also responsible for over 70% of total agricultural emissions, making it a major hotspot. This is due to a variety of factors, including low feed conversion efficiencies, enteric fermentation, and manure, that are extremely hard to address. On the whole, plant-based products are far less environmentally impactful to produce. For example, producing peas requires 6 times less land and is 36 times less emissions intensive than producing beef. Evidence shows that switching to more plant-based diets could reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than half and other environmental impacts by almost a quarter. What's clear is that we can't fix everything through actions to improve food production alone. It's not possible to align ourselves with the 1.5 degree trajectory by changing food production solely. We also need to change our diets and reduce our consumption of meat and dairy. This is because increasing production efficiencies can only achieve a certain amount of emissions reduction. At the end of the day, if we don't change our demand patterns, then there's no hope for achieving the far-reaching changes that are needed. Yes, we need technology change, but we also desperately need behaviour change. We need to make deep cuts to hard to treat sectors, including agriculture. And part of that has to come through moving to more plant-based diets. Dietary shift is a promising solution as it provides win-win outcomes. Eating less animal products and more plants is not just better for the environment, but it leads to better health outcomes too. Overconsumption of animal products has been connected to a wide range of diet-related diseases, including heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, while eating more fruits and vegetables especially, contributes to greater longevity, can lower blood pressure, reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke, prevent some types of cancer, and reduce the risk of eye and digestive problems. The good news is that foods that are more sustainable tend to be healthier too. There's a strong argument here in terms of food security as well, because despite the amount of land and other natural resources that animal agriculture uses, it provides just 18% of our calories and 37% of our protein. Growing crops that are human edible to feed to livestock, who then convert those crops into meat, is not an efficient way to be feeding ourselves. And it threatens future food security. Thank you. If we are to provide enough food for a growing global population into the future that is predicted to reach 11 billion by the end of the century, we really need to move away from our current animal agriculture systems. The last point I want to make is that this is something that's empowering for consumers too. The average person's beef consumption in the UK generates the equivalent CO2 emissions as driving over 2,000 miles in a car. In a world where many of us feel powerless to make a difference, dietary change is the one thing that we can all do. We eat food 3 times a day or more. It's something that we have control over as individuals, and we can all make different choices that are better for our health and our planetary health. On the whole, reducing the quantity of meat in our diets is the most powerful action we can take to reduce our environmental impact, and it's better for us too. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Round of applause, please, for Joe. Timed wonderfully as well. Our debaters are probably just warming up. You're being very polite. You are encouraged to raise points of information if you do disagree. We're going to go back now for another 5 minutes from Isabel on the proposition.
So I'm very grateful to the opposition for bringing us to consumption, because as someone who works in marketing, the consumer is at the heart of everything that I do. And at the crux of considering consumption, there has to be the consumer. What are real people eating around the world today, and how are they engaging with food options that bring us to a net zero future? This breaks down into 2 focus areas for the consumer and their food choices. On the one hand, health, and on the other, happiness. In both instances, we can see how a continued but decreased use of animal agriculture can be a better option than moving to 100% plant-based for the consumer. Starting with health. We know from coverage in the media and the recent Eat Lancet report that in the global north, especially Europe and the US, as the opposition mentioned, we do need to reduce our dietary dependence on meat and animal proteins for the sake of our health. However, it's not as simple as this. We see this globally is not the case, and particularly in the global south, especially South Asia, a decrease in the consumption of plant-based carbohydrates and an increase in meat protein would actually improve the relative dietary health. Further, when looking at how dietary health intersects with planetary health, we can see that simply moving to a totally plant-based global diet is not necessary for a net zero 2050, and even if achievable, would not make net zero viable without equal implementation to reduce food loss and improve food production practices. So therefore, while there is a requirement to reduce our meat consumption for our health, there is still a requirement to consume a small amount of meat in a conscientious way to have a well-rounded dietary health, even in a net zero world. There is also the question of health outside of scholastic understanding, at the level of consumer understanding. At the end of the day, there is still the expectation, as proven in the Lancet findings, that some meat and animal products are necessary for a healthy, balanced diet. This has been taught to us throughout food diagrams, for example. While it could be argued that new meat and dairy alternative products can be used to fill that portion of the plate like an animal protein does, it's not simply the case of like for like, as many of these products have higher calorie content, higher salt content, and higher saturated fat content. So we know that certain meat products are not healthy for us, but a Beyond Burger arguably isn't either. So it's not as simple as just putting one instead of the other. And there are also comparative supply chains that are not limited to simply the creation of the meat or meat alternative product. I said at the beginning that consumer choice is not limited to health and also pertains to happiness. And we cannot discount general happiness from our conversation around food choices. Food is deeply linked to emotional response. It's deeply linked to memories. And if you think of a favorite meal, perhaps related to a celebration or a loved one, it's simply not always possible to replace that with a plant-based alternative. And you might say to me that we're talking about net zero and it should be more important than a few special meals and they're worth giving it up. But actually for the consumer, that sense of deprivation can be enough to stop someone from thinking about even reducing. And that starts to get into the territory of overstepping on people's right to choose. That really brings me to the heart of my argument, both regarding health and happiness. In both instances, we see that less meat for most people is actually better than no animal-based products for the few. The current purity culture that surrounds veganism can be more of a detriment than an encouragement to the levels of reduction that we need to achieve net zero. On the one hand, you have consumer confusion about what they should and should not keep in their diet. Where are these products coming from that are a plant-based alternative? And this can lead to a crippling indecision and the final result of making no change at all. On another aspect, you have the mockings of veganism from individuals like Piers Morgan, who make fun of the names of products and joke that the desire of flexitarians to reduce their meat intake is really helping no one. And finally, there's the expectation of perfection by those who do commit to veganism, and it's even contributing to the rise of a new eating disorder, orthorexia, where people who are committed to eating quote-unquote perfectly, they are doing this at their own detriment. So there's more benefit in encouraging a flexible approach in line with flexitarianism that has a continued role of animal agriculture products, but in a reduced capacity than current dietary choices. Overall, if you'll excuse the pun, you'll see there's a low appetite to go cold turkey on animal agriculture. Scott has shown you it doesn't make sense for the industry and that there are benefits to changing our approach to more sustainable methods that still incorporate animal agriculture even. And I have shown you today that for the consumer, less is the better option than none when it comes to both health and happiness in a net zero future world. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Isabel. We had a whoop from the audience. We had invoking Piers Morgan and a purity culture. So things are warming up on the boat. Next, for our final speaker on the opposition team, Louise, to wrap up this section, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise and I'm from Nestle and I am a climate and carbon neutrality manager, and I'm here to rebut, I think the word is, the very persuasive arguments from the proposition. So we've had Scott first of all starting off with beautiful pictures of grass-fed beef and grass-fed dairy all looking pretty wonderful, and Isabel also talking about the real consumer. But I think the first point I'd like to point out is that it actually isn't going to be feasible to change to these systems that these pictures have been painted. And the first reason for this is that our current systems, they're too large and they're too embedded, and it would take far too long to switch it to the systems that these guys have been talking about. We've heard kind of throughout COP, throughout this week, throughout the week to come, that things need to change quickly, they need to change fast, we need to up the rate of change in order to keep 1.5 alive. And the changes that you guys are making are going to take so much time to put those into practice that it's not a viable option. We also wouldn't be able to regulate these systems. So at the moment, we've seen a lot of issues around the fact that there is a lack of transparency in a lot of our commodity supply chains already, particularly with our forest-based products. And I don't see why this would be any different. And we need the whole of the beef, meat, all animal product supply chain to change in order to make a meaningful difference. And if we can't have that transparency that we need to regulate it, I don't see how that will happen. The third reason that our systems won't be able to change is because we simply don't have enough space to support these types of systems that we need. So a fundamental of regenerative agriculture practices and climate positive practices is we need a lot of space for our beautiful mob grazing dairy farms and all of that. But versus an intensive, hard-standing fence lot that we're seeing in a lot of our intensive dairy farms across the world, how are we supposed to replicate those with the massive land use that we need? It doesn't actually balance with this need to stop land use change that we're seeing, reversing deforestation that we've done in the past, and also reforesting. How do we balance those arguments together? But okay, we'll live in fancy land for a bit and say that we can change these systems to produce it. But even if we do, we're still going to have problems with putting these things into practice. So currently, our supply chains are based on systems to prioritize high volumes and at low prices. So moving to a regenerative and climate positive system is going to lead to a rise in prices. This is going to mean, Isabel talked actually earlier about the real consumer and real people wanting to kind of consume meat. But actually, this is going to lead to reduced accessibility to animal products for poorer communities, not just in the global south, but across the world. And it's going to add that further point of inequality to our already, let's be honest, pretty broken food system and unequal food system. And it's going to exacerbate crises of poverty, crises of adequate nutrition that we're already seeing, and we don't need that additional layer there with the increase in meat prices. Finally, it's never been easier to switch to the diet without animal products. We don't need them anymore. We're trying to retrofit solutions onto a system that is got us into this problem in the first place, whereas in other places we're ripping up the rule book and trying to think outside the box. So why aren't we doing that here? I mean, we've got a vegan Kit Kat sitting on a boat in the middle of the Clyde as we speak. Like, we didn't think that would happen 5 years ago. So we need dramatic systemic change, like we've been calling for throughout this week at COP. And the way to do that individually in the most powerful way is to change to a diet that doesn't have meat or animal products in it. And so I think it's a pretty easy switch, no-nonsense argument that we could all do very easily. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. This is the opportunity for you to absolutely tear into one another's arguments now. You've been terribly polite so far. Joe, if you just want to put your hand up, I'll keep an eye on you to make sure that you get in as well. But seeing as you're all being relatively polite, I might begin and ask the proponents of this argument to pick up where Louise left off, really. We haven't had a moral argument so far. What is the need to exploit animals when we know that we can do this without that?
Look, I think the world is becoming increasingly polarised. We see that every day in our politicians. And as we get closer to the deadline on action on climate change, we're all sort of grasping for a magic formula. The answers to reducing greenhouse gases and food production aren't black and white. The truth is we need to work together. The two systems, livestock and plant-based agriculture, complement each other. When you're in Scotland or the UK, all we can grow is grass. In Scotland, on 85% of our land, and the UK as a whole, 65%. We're going to lose our food security if we don't have animal agriculture. We're going to decimate our rural communities. My business has 3 full-time partners, has 4 full-time staff. We put just under £1 million every year into the wider economy. And if we take that away, so if I grow the only alternative crop for my land, which is trees, we're actually going to sequester less carbon for 20 or 30 years because it takes the tree 20 or 30 years to start sequestering any significant amount of carbon. We're not going to have rural communities anymore. And we're not going to have any food security. And it exposes us to an incredible extent to the sort of disputes that we had 2 weeks ago with France, where we're actually exporting our carbon footprint for our food. And they control the gateway for that food to come in.
Sure, I can add. I think when we talk about fully plant-based diets, we talk about it from a position of privilege of people who can as well. So you talk about the moral debate around oh, we shouldn't be, using animals. And on the one hand, you have a natural food pyramid structure where for centuries, millennia, humans have been carnivores or omnivores, and that has been accepted. But when we talk about privilege around this debate, there are two groups of people. Firstly, people who are medically unable to change their diet in this way, and I mentioned orthorexia in my piece, but actually, if you have restrictive eating, trying to change to a restrictive diet can be very harmful, and people with physical ailments where diet is necessary to control them, it's just not able in this debate. But actually also, if you think, we heard earlier today from Rainforest Alliance about indigenous communities, where actually there are natural agriculture and food dietary expectations which are including animal products. And who is it for us to say, particularly in the privilege of the global north, that we should all be going to a plant-based diet? That's the easy thing, that's the right thing to do. We do have access to meat alternatives here, but actually around the world there are far more sustainable natural diets that have occurred rather than our general move towards overconsumption, which maybe is worse.
Thank you. Joe, Louise, anything you've heard there you want to take issue with?
Yeah, I guess I'm happy to start with, I understand, Scott, what you're saying is there's only certain things that you can grow in that area, but one of the things that we've been talking about is that we need to kind of take back some of the land that we've been farming and replace it with nature. And it's not just the carbon sequestration ability of trees that would be beneficial, but also the biodiversity that we can build in those areas, the resilience to effects of climate change, like flooding or extreme weather events. And I think we can't just look at it in terms of agriculture. Well, if we can't do kind of animal products, this is the only other alternative, and that's not right. I think there's so many other options for that land. And I think we need to kind of, the more our food system might be exported out, but everything else is globalized in this world. And with the reduced carbon emissions from kind of a more efficient logistics system, we should be able to manage that, I think, pretty okay with the kind of natural solutions that we'd be able to replace it with.
I don't know if that won them over. Joe, anything from your perspective to add on that point?
Yeah, I'd like to just come in on this kind of restriction and affordability points, really. I think in terms of affordability, it's a bit of a misconception that kind of plant-based diets have to be more expensive and are therefore less accessible. There's nothing cheaper when you go to the supermarket than vegetables. So, I don't think that point is quite right, really. And I think that plant-based diets can be accessible to anyone. It's about kind of helping people understand how to eat a plant-based diet that is kind of affordable and accessible. I think that's the piece that's maybe been missing today. So yeah, just wanted to add that in. And on restriction, I think what's really important here is that when we're talking about shifting to plant-based diets, we're not talking about restriction. That's kind of a message that is out there that has damaged really this debate and kind of coming to a sustainable and acceptable solution for everyone. Actually, what we should be focusing on is the sheer variety of foods out there that people can be eating that would reduce their reliance on animal-based foods. So I think that's where we should focus rather than on these kind of conceptions of restriction. So I don't think that's right at all, and doesn't have to be the way we go this.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, there's a big focus on kind of so much of our diet is made up of kind of 5 key parts, and no one changes their diet. They have their standard weekly meals. I think we should be really looking at agrobiodiversity as well. And the point that Scott was making around kind of nothing else can grow. We've got a whole load of kind of native species, of different species of wheat, other plants that have been kind of sidelined for more efficient species from kind of all over the world. Whereas if we go back to kind of our natural endemic plant species that we can eat as well, that will add variety and improve food security as well.
Great new book on that by a guy called Dan Scarvino, I think, but Dan something or other. If anyone wants to fact check that for me. Audience, we're going to come to you soon. Opposition, I think you're getting a bit of an easy ride here. If I'm a fossil fuel lobbyist, I'm delighted to sit here and listen to you talking about cows while I keep my emissions increasing to the end of the next decade. Isn't this a sideshow when we really need to be focusing on that?
Yeah. So it's a fair point, but I think, you know, Joe mentioned it earlier that it's going to be a mixture of solutions. There isn't just a one, you know, everyone changes to an electric car, they cycle everywhere, we never go on holiday, we're sedentary. This is, you know, what everyone can do. That it's a kind of patchwork of choices that we can all make and things that we can change. There's not going to be one solution to kind of fix the climate crisis, and we all need to, you know, focus on different parts of our societies, and the only people who control your diet is yourself. So this is a really easy fix that you can do, whilst then also putting pressure on the fossil fuel magnates.
Just to add to what Louise was saying there, I think, you know, the sectors that you just mentioned in terms of fossil fuels and, you know, arguably other sectors like transport and infrastructure have already received a lot of attention. And, you know, there is action starting from policymakers to address emissions in many of those sectors. But food has remained largely absent, even from discussions here at COP. So I do think there's a real need to start putting attention on the food system and what can be done to kind of address emissions arising from it, especially given it represents about 30% of global emissions. So yeah, important to focus on food.
Yeah, definitely a notable omission from the official agenda. Isabel, you were going to come in?
I was just going to say that on your point, doesn't a patchwork of choices look far more like flexitarianism than being 100% plant-based?
Groans, we got groans. Come back.
I was more referring to a patchwork of choices in terms of not just looking at your personal diet, but then also your other personal choices, like you know, whether you cycle to work, whether you take public transport, whether you take a massive kind of gas guzzling machine. It was more around a patchwork of choices and levers that we can pull across society, not just in your diet.
I think, you know, I come back to the whole efficiency argument. If we were sitting here and all the cows in the world were as efficient as the cows are in the UK, we wouldn't be having this conversation. How do we? I think fundamentally there's a place for plant-based agriculture. If we have land which can grow plants, then let's grow it on there, right? It's important to note that on 40% of the cultivated land in the world, we're actually fertilizing that land with livestock manure. So a lot of these plant-based crops are being fertilized by livestock manure. In the UK, we've got to focus on our food security. Grass is our biggest crop. It's the only crop that we can really grow in the majority of our land. And I'm not saying that we can't grow more plants, but it's an absolutely fundamental part of our food security, you know. And I think what we're going to see now in both plant-based and animal agriculture is a move towards regenerative farming. Regenerative farming is all about the health of the soil and producing more from less inputs, restoring degraded soils and rebuilding their organic matter. Some of the most depleted soils in the world are where we've had monoculture, plant-based agriculture. Think of the American prairies, where we used to have a rich grass-based carbon sink grazed by bison. Arable farming turned that into a dust bowl, where the topsoil blew away. Think of the African plains.
Okay, now you're just sneaking in your speech from the start. I spotted that. We're going to go. I want to get the audience in here, but the point well taken. Thank you. So we're going to go. We also have a bit of a geographic balance. We're going to take two from here, then two over there, then a little bit from outside the room. We're going to incentivize short and pithy comments, free vegan Kit Kats for everyone who stays under 30 seconds. So I'm going to go here and here first, and then green and in the puffy jacket. So here, please.
Scott, I have a question for you, please. When you spoke, I think the only time you mentioned the animals was in relation to their efficiency in food production. And when Barry asked you your views on exploitation of animals, I don't think you mentioned animals at all in your answer. You spoke about food security and you spoke about the effect on the rural economy. Could I please ask you, just in a very short answer, to limit yourself solely to the animals as they exist outside of being food supplies for us, and tell us a little bit about what they mean to you.
Got that. We'll go back. I'm going to take a group. I'll note them down and put them back to you. We'll go here with the green hat as well. We'll take a group together.
Hi, wow, awesome style of debating. My name is Bramley. I'm a small indigenous farmer from the eastern Himalayas. We work with 100,000 smallholder farmers in the mountains. Most of them are not represented here. So you talked about them. I'd like to ask you a question to role play and pretend you're them. So you can be the sub-Saharan African farmer. She can be an indigenous farmer in the Brazilian rainforest, and she can be a highland farmer in the eastern Himalayas. My question to you is this. What would you do to fight this climate change pandemic that's releasing all the virus? Project Drawdown says that if we follow and regenerate our entire farming lands across the planet, we can restore our soils with regenerative agriculture and draw down 30 gigatons a year. Why would you do that? Because you guys will maybe borrowing loans at least in India, 25% as a farmer, small interest loan, micro loans, which is completely different from the common agricultural policy where you get subsidies in Europe like crazy. It's so unfair because we're just talking about issues of the West. What about the global farmers like you guys in the South? What would you do? How would you fight this race to provide for the Southern
great. Point
world?
taken. Thank you very much. Very powerful one as well. Global South perspective. We've already asked them to role play for the debate. I don't think we'll double role play, but the point is a good one. I want to come here to the woman in the green jumper first. Woman in the green jumper in front of you there, and then you on the next round.
That's actually.
Keep going. Just talk.
Hello? Do you hear me, Neil?
Can we get another microphone in there? And we are sanitizing the microphones in between, just to clarify.
Hi, I'm actually from Scotland, just local to Glasgow. I just want to make a point to Scott and kind of all the growers in the audience. I started this year with a little small allotment. So this is basically a given by the local council a plot of land to grow vegetables. And I grow coriander this year. I grow beets. I grow plenty of other things, Brussels sprouts, sweet, in Scotland. I've been in this country for about 12, 15 years, and I've seen the climate changing. Unfortunately, it's getting warmer. So I can grow vegetables, and I'm happy with that. But basically, global climate changing, allowing us to grow different crops in Scotland. So I respectfully agree with you that, climate sort of Scotland especially allows you to sort of for grazing animals, especially the geography of the country. But we can grow outside respectfully for the soil. I use no digging or allotment growing. Yes, I do have access to manure, but I respect, I don't till.
Okay, so a point that there is some wider diversity. Can we stop picking on Scott, please? And so, guy in the puffy jacket, if you're going to go after Scott, we're going to have to move on a bit.
No, I'm going after Louise, actually.
Great.
Louise's, seemingly to me, two pillar arguments are, one, that it will take too long to change the system, so there's just no point going, well, that may be true, but we just saw with COVID vaccination that a vaccination program was rolled out in unbelievable speed once it became a first world problem. So in developing worlds, it takes ages, takes years. But as soon as it becomes a first world problem, the money's there, the will's there, things move really fast on seemingly impossible things. The other thing you said was it was going to be, to have high quality meat, you'd need a meat price hike. And of course, that's on the assumption that it should be the taxpayer that pays for the pollution and the health effects that come from the cheap meat. So what happens if it just changes, and so the polluter has to pay for the cleaning up the pollution and the health effects that it passes on to the NHS? So, because a Sustainable Food Trust report has found that for every pound spent on meat, there is an 87p cost that is passed on to the taxpayer.
Thanks. And the one beside you in the furry collar came all the way downstairs to ask her question, so please.
Hey, sorry, I'm going to pick on Scott again. I'm from...
Can we do that in the next round then? We'll come back to you again.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I got 2 points on this side. We want a specific question about the animals, not their efficiency, what's going on there, and then a perspective from the smallholder, and I think probably from the Global South perspective as well.
Okay, so animal welfare, the welfare of my animals is absolutely fundamental to success. It's my primary focus every day of my life. I work 7 days a week, I work 70 hours a week, and my focus is on animal welfare, from calf to cow to the end of their life. It is absolutely fundamental to the profitability of my business, that, and directly linked to the profitability of my business, that we have high welfare. In the UK, we have some of the best welfare standards in the world. Are we a perfect industry? No. Are there problems? Yes. But the best farmers, and I consider myself to be one of the best farmers in the UK, have excellent standards in terms of animal welfare, and it is their primary focus day to day. It's absolutely fundamental. Farmed animals don't have complete freedom. They don't. And if you're uncomfortable with eating animals, then you shouldn't. But you can eat animals and be assured that the absolute majority of farmed animals live good lives. They live healthy, productive lives, and they have a freedom of spirit. And I'm absolutely passionate about animal welfare.
To broaden this out to the panel then, subsidies here, it's easier to do that in Scotland. To respond to the next point, what does this look like for a smallholder farmer who doesn't have access to those resources, and how do they participate in the transition to net zero?
Access to what resources?
The resources that are available here in the UK. We're not getting into Brexit now, but we talked about the Common Agricultural Policy. Those aren't available in the Global South.
Yeah, look, CAP to a dairy farmer makes no difference. It's a nice bonus at the end of the year. It wouldn't feed my cows for a month. I think, to go specifically to your question, I don't really know enough about the industry, where you're from. I think you asked me to speak from a sub-Saharan Africa perspective. I keep coming back to the efficiency of the cows in the UK. I don't think we should have a cow if all it's going to do is produce methane, a small amount of milk and a small amount of meat. I think if we have land which can support plant growth, then we should probably grow plants on it. But we need to think about how we fertilise that soil in a sustainable way, and I think livestock is part of that. I think there's a lot of chat at COP26 about how we help developing countries, get to net zero quicker, and some of the knowledge sharing and the technology that we have in UK-based farming that has made us so efficient. Surely part of that can be sharing that knowledge with developing countries.
Yeah, I think to Scott's point, it's perfectly said. There's not much use in us pretending to be those people. It would be much more valuable having them in the room and talking with them and finding out what they need and how we help them. It's not especially relevant to plant-based versus meat agriculture, but as Nescafe, we have many training programs for farmers in those areas about how they can make better sustainable agriculture choices, how they can reduce their water use, how they can have better yields for actually with more sustainable farming practices on their coffee plantlets. So it's about how we as large companies, large brands, can also be empowering these people who aren't always in the room in the debate and should be.
Cool. Great. Louise, you were specifically called on a couple of points there.
Yes, so I think your first point was around kind of pace of change and highlighting the COVID crisis and how quickly we mobilised. it's a great point, but I personally believe one of the reasons that we've got into this kind of issue in the first place is because we're constantly operating on human timescales rather than timescales of nature. Nature takes longer. It can adapt and it is resilient, and we've seen that through kind of historic climate changes. But the problem with this current climate crisis is because we're changing at a quicker rate than nature is able to adapt to. So yes, we can mobilize really quickly, but it's still, I know what you're saying, that we can kind of put things in place, but nature still doesn't have that capacity to recover at the human timescale that we're looking to. And your second point, I can't actually remember what it was. But
Polluter pays.
Polluter pays. Yeah, so I think, I don't see a reality where the higher quality of meat that we're talking about getting in these regenerative agriculture practices and climate positive practices, we're not going to see the kind of volumes of meat that we're seeing today. And that, with kind of a bit more scarcity, does become a higher price. That's just how the market works. And I think that you're also looking at it from a slightly UK perspective. And if kind of meat that we're getting is from the global south, I think it's very highly likely that that will then be exported to richer global north countries where they'll have the kind of capacity to buy it and consume it, adding another point of inequality to diets in the global south.
Okay. Anything from Joe before I go back out to questions? Nope.
I just wanted to add, if it's all right, very quickly, a point on the global south. I think this links back really nicely to the UN Food Systems Summit back in September. But, essentially addressing this globally, rather than just thinking about countries such as the UK, is crucial. If we cannot get to a point where every government in the world is enabled to support farmers on a just rural transition, then we're quite simply not going to fix the problem. So I think that's absolutely key.
Great. And back to the floor again, please.
Oh, hello. Hey, what's the crack? So I'm from Ireland as well, and it's obviously very politically divisive there because a lot of our emissions come from our national herd. I think about 60% of agriculture in Ireland comes from the cattle herd that we have. And the Irish government keeps saying, also keeps talking about these efficiency gains, saying that, okay, well, we can make farming more efficient, but it's kind of unclear about how that actually works and what's like the efficiency delta in terms of, okay, what kind of technology can you apply and how much will that technology reduce the emissions from methane? And then just to the other point about fertilizing, I mean, if you had wildlife, cows aren't the only things that can fertilize the ground. I mean, way back when we didn't have as many cows, there was actually animals running around like foxes and deer and wolves and stuff, and they also like poo and fertilize the soil. So the notion that cows are the only things that can fertilize the soil is kind of a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah. Well, we're going to go another round. You can come back to that in your closing statements. We have a little bit coming in from online, so we're going to go to people who are joining us outside the room.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's really hard to pick and choose from all these questions. So we've been having a lot of feedback from the digital audience. Just a few points here. So understanding the concept of consumer mentality and obviously the lengthy process of social change as well. What is realistically the timeline in which we will all be eating more plant-based products and less meat? What is the role that culture plays in that? Because we're looking at a global perspective as well. And just one additional point that we received here is who exactly are we looking at for these changes? Who's leading it? Are we talking about government collaborations? Are we talking about private sector? Who are we looking at? Like in a larger scale of this conversation, who is going to be leading this change? Thank you.
Lots to respond to in 2 minutes in your final statements. Here, this gentleman here. We get the microphone just behind, and then those two people on the end, and then we're going to wrap up. This gentleman here.
Sorry, thank you. Just wanted to, respectfully, it takes a lot of courage as a dairy farmer to get up here. Often I've met with lots of dairy farmers recently about some of these issues, but a lot of what you said is, I think, wrong. The methane report that you quoted comes from one scientist who's been famed for being funded by the meat and dairy lobby. Joseph Paul's work, the least efficient plant-based is still more efficient than the most efficient animal-based production. And the whole idea of 50% more efficient, 50% of terrible isn't great, it's still just less terrible. And the question about sort of, personal choice that you raised is a question of, if you think that what's on our plate now is a matter of personal choice, and you haven't been paying any attention at all to the way big meat and big dairy has been lobbying, aggressively advertising and legislating for the past 60 years. So actually, I think a lot of what you said is just actually wrong.
Okay, points of information, thank you. Here, here, and here. I've got 20 seconds for each of you, 20 seconds each.
I'd just like to sort of add a sort of question of indulgence. I think the global south they don't have any connection, say, with chocolate. And should we be producing this anymore? I mean, it's not an essential part of our diet. And we need sort of these nature-based solutions, and we need sort of to protect our storm surges. And is this just a luxury in the global north?
Luxury, thank you. At the very back.
Just a question from. Question for myself. I live on a farm in Scotland. I've visited a feedlot in the United States, and I've spent a lot of time with zebu owners in Madagascar. Isn't it about time that we actually got the debate settled by people who have actually know and have first-hand experience of farming, and not simply social media-based opinions?
Indeed, in Madagascar, which is on the verge of the first confirmed climate-related famine. In the south. And the final comment from the floor, I think.
Yeah, so you've mainly talked about the effect that cows and agriculture have directly with the environment. But what about the other factors that come into play before you actually have the cows and the cattle there? So for example, I'm from Peru, and in the Amazon, before you do agriculture, there's deforestation and burning of the land. And that destroys the environment and destroys the ecosystems, and then it's really hard to systems to regrow there because the land is now wasted, and also all of the animals and things that were in that space have to move to other places, so it creates a really big unbalance in near ecosystems as well. So if animal agriculture continues, so how would we deal with that?
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to formal closing statements. So I'm going to ask for 2 minutes to have whoever has decided that they want to take that Hail Mary pass and close for the proposition from the podium. 2 minutes. I'll give you a knock halfway through.
Battered and bruised here. Right, okay. So livestock emissions, 6% of greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. You factor in sequestration, about 3.7%. Not a huge problem. Our industry has an ambition to be net zero, or our milk group has an ambition to be net zero by 2030. The brands that we are aligned to, some of them will be net zero by 2025. The industry as a whole has an ambition to be net zero by 2040. We control a lot of the soil in this country, which is a massive opportunity to be more of a carbon sink than it already is. Dairy products, and I'm a dairy farmer, they have a better market penetration than toilet paper does in this country. There are dairy products in more UK households than there is toilet paper. And when you have that sort of market penetration, it's really easy to be relaxed about selling your product and to forget about selling the story behind what you do. And we've been caught out by that badly. None of us are good enough at talking about what we do and about how passionate we are about the animals that we farm. Sorry, I've just lost myself here. I think, what I want everyone, and I feel like I've failed at the minute, but what I'd like everyone to leave here feeling like is that you can choose dairy products without feeling guilty about it. And I think if you don't want to eat red meat or to eat products from farmed animals, then that's fine, and I actually completely get that. But don't do it from a climate-based perspective. We are absolutely determined to get to net zero. The figures that are advertised in the press are significantly worse than the reality. No, just let me finish, please. Let me finish.
30 seconds.
Upstairs, we've got oat milk and we've got soya milk. How ridiculous is that? Oat milk, probably procured in Sweden, doing the man that's producing milk down the road out of a business. Soya milk. Where do we grow soya? Oh, the Amazon rainforest.
All right. Okay, we're gonna cut it there. Thank you very much, Scott. We're gonna give 2 minutes to Joe, I think, is it, to close us out for the opposition.
Thank you. So Louise and I have laid out the impact that animal agriculture has on the planet, the impact that consuming too much animal-based food has on health. As we said earlier, we need to change what we are eating to achieve 1.5 degrees. That's a fact. That needs to happen at global level. It needs to happen especially at national level here in the UK, but also in other countries where there is significant overconsumption of animal protein. Simply asking people to eat less, these vague calls to eat less that were pointed out earlier in the debate, won't lead to change at scale. It's something that's not well understood by people, how much less do I eat? And it leads to burden shifting. Things like meatless Mondays, research has shown that actually if people don't eat meat on a Monday, they go on to eat more meat later during the week. So it's not the solution. People need clear boundaries and to understand what's needed. As Louise pointed out, it would simply take too long and wouldn't be feasible if we were to try and change all of our embedded systems. We need to act now, and we need to act at scale and at pace. And it's simply not possible if we're thinking about changing current animal agriculture systems to something more sustainable. What is more sustainable production anyway? We don't even know this. So we're not in a position to rapidly change to more sustainable systems that also have better outcomes when it comes to animal welfare. Shifting to more plant-based diets will produce win-win outcomes for people, for planet, and for animals. While current products like plant-based meat alternatives might be less healthy, these can be reformulated, and there are other solutions that can be taken. Let's all shift to more plant-based diets, increase our vegetable consumption, and create better outcomes across all those different areas. And let's do it now.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. So, we've heard what everybody's had to say. We're going to do our final vote. This time around, we're going to ask the question slightly differently. To begin with, has anybody had their mind changed? I would really love a hand in the air now. Is that one person? One? Who? Okay, we've got one person whose mind was changed, one person whose mind was kind of changed. Anyone else? Okay, up the back. Moved in favor or against? Towards, so supporting the motion. Yes. Okay. That's one vote for supporting. How was your mind changed? In the other direction. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a draw. I want to thank particularly the speakers for being good sports, but also all of you. You've participated in a genuine, actual debate, whether you had your mind changed or not. Quite important, I think, that different perspectives can be in the same room these days, be heard, be listened to. Even if you don't change your mind, it's important to be challenged a little bit. We'll wrap up now a little bit late, and it's lunchtime, so God knows what you're going to choose to eat. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Sorry. I'm going to thank people, eh? Sorry, and obviously a huge thank you to our host, Nestle, for backing the event, Extreme Hangout for hosting, and the guys at One Young World for curating the program. Thank you.
Honestly, thank you so much, Barry, Louise, Scott, Isabel, Joe for joining digitally. We could have gone on for hours and hours. Thank you, everybody, for all of your insightful questions, for everybody who dropped in a question as well digitally. Everything was really well received. Thank you for the flow of everything. Keep tuning in and stay on for the next session at 3 p.m. Thank you so much for being here.